I was actually looking for Argos for my wife's benefit. I was going to buy a carpet sweeper and bring it in and say we get rid of the Tories with this, but all that's gone now. But I told her before I was, because I couldn't find Argos, but when I was, Maureen asked me, where are you going tonight? And I said, well, I'm going to save the NHS tonight. She said, well, when you've done that, perhaps you'll do the windows tomorrow. Anyway, I'm David Taylor Gooby. More seriously, I'm Secretary of the Northern Socialist Health Association, which is a body set up in the 1930s by medical people to campaign for a publicly funded NHS. You know, when there was debate going on before the war, and if you read about the debate that went on before the war, it wasn't quite the cosy consensus some of us think it was, you know, and there were an awful lot of people, some wanted local government to run health and others wanted it to be run by charities and privately and so on. But the SHA campaigned for a socialist approach, and we still exist. We're largely funded by Unite, which is very much appreciated. And we're open to not just Labour Party members, any sympathetic person, but we do affiliate the Labour Party, so we do have a way into policy, so that things we do can get it in. And we try and address issues that need to be sorted out. I am also a lay commissioner on the CCG, much to my amazement, but I am. What I'm saying, I have to say this, is not on behalf of that body or the NHS, these are my own personal opinions. Right. If a Labour government gets elected, or when a Labour government gets elected, but which is what I want to happen, it's got to move pretty quick on this NHS business. So it's got to have it very clear what it wants to do. Now, repealing the Act is important, so you don't have this legal business that colleagues have all mentioned, that people will challenge you if you commission an NHS service. A private firm will say we should be doing that. And it wastes an awful lot of time and money on lawyers, so we want to stop that. Secondly, and I take issue with one or two colleagues, there will be a need for more money for, horrible word, transformation, but what it basically means is changes where you're going to do more in the community and less in hospitals, and you always have to fund that, because you can't start a new service. You have to keep the old service going until you get the new one going. You can't do what the government seems to be doing at the moment, which is cutting money off from hospitals to put into social services, and local authorities, I was a councillor for 20 years as well, I'm not necessarily criticising them, but they're so short of money. One may have doubts whether that money all goes into social services, and at the same time, the foundation trusts just carry on as before and think the government will bail them out because there's an election next year. So you're heading for a big financial crisis next year, actually. We're just transferring money into social services, which is what's happening at the moment. If you're going to do that, and it's basically a good idea, there has to be more money. So you get the support in the community going before you reduce the foundation trust beds. You know, that's fairly obvious to me. It's not obvious to the government. The government says it will be done within existing budgets. And so there will have to be more money. So as socialists, one's got to think of a fair way of raising that. Now, there are ideas. Frank Field suggested something. A lady called Kate Barker has written a report where she's analysed various alternatives. But I don't want to talk about them now with you. You might come back a bit later. I just want to say that's an issue. It's no good the Labour Party being dishonest with the electorate. And that's an issue that will have to be faced, and we'll have to think about it. And finally, we've got to stop the privatisation of commissioning. I sit on a CCG, and they are unaccountable bodies. I only have power by what I can manipulate and go around the back door. I have no voting power. The GPs decide things, or a few GPs decide things, I've discovered, not all of them. And I can make a noise, and all the tricks I learned when I was a councillor, I can manipulate things and do all that sort of thing. But I don't actually have power, and I think we have to make CCGs much more accountable bodies. We're going to promise no top-down reorganisation, you see, so we can't reorganise the whole thing again, because we're promising we'll not do that. But we have to make CCGs much more publicly accountable. And I would like to see them more like social enterprises, where they have representation by patients, representation from the public, as well as representation by GPs. All this is set up in a book which I've written, actually, but if you want to buy a copy of that, because they've all sold out, I don't have any with me, but the publisher's called Searching Finance, and I would ask you to look on Searching Finance's website, because it's a radical publishing house that's done quite a lot, most of it about economics and debt, and it's a good publishing house, so don't necessarily buy my book, but have a look at Searching Finance. And I also think commissioning organisations, you all know what I mean by that, because the NHS is a bit archaic, you're not in it. Do any of you know what a commissioning organisation is? Do you all know? Because you're all experts, are you? Well, they're what's left of the old PCTs, you know, that organise the commissioning.
People have never heard of them either.
Right, well, the CCG decides... CCGs only employ about 75 people. They get a commissioning organisation to organise things for them, and they basically get advice from the commissioning organisation. Now, those are the people that the government wants privatised. And I went to a conference and talked to someone from NHS that he vaguely burbled about they should become social enterprises. But when I said to him, what is that, he hadn't got a clue. So I think they should be publicly owned bodies, right? And if some are already privately owned, when those contracts end, they should be taken back, rather like railway companies. So that's the sort of plan I think we have to sort the NHS out without a top-down reorganisation. Now, but I've got about 2 minutes left. What I really want to talk about is what several colleagues have mentioned, the sort of ethics of all this, that the NHS was an example of a socialist enterprise that worked. And that's one reason why it was popular. But that doesn't mean it was perfect. And it wasn't always very good at organising people and listening to the public. It was extremely hierarchical. And I think if we're going to have an NHS which concentrates more on community care and concentrates more on trying to get people to be healthier in the community, and that's not always very easy when you're poor. I mean, you walk around this city. How many health food shops are there in Elmsip and places like that? Not very many, you know. And I live in one of the poorest parts of the country. I live in Easington constituency. And, you know, we've got more fast food shops than anywhere else, apparently. Now, it's not that people necessarily like fast food. They just can't always cope. And there's a project being done about a cookery book for families, you know, on low budgets and things like this. But all this won't just happen by a few people like me preaching about it. A lot of people would tell me where to go if I went and saw on the street corner and started telling them they should eat healthily. It's got to be done as part of an engagement strategy. And if you want to know what I mean, go to Healthworks in Easington, where they've got 4,000 members in a community project which grows vegetables, does cooking, and they're not all people like me in it. They are genuine inhabitants of Easington. So that's what we've got to do. Now, all that will cost a lot of money. And I'll just conclude by saying this is what engagement is not. It's not having a meeting in the afternoon where people who work can't come, where you have a nice lunch. And we all know the sort of people who come to that. Nice people, but they don't necessarily represent the whole community. I won't use the word usual suspects, but I think you know what I mean, right? And it's not, as I have seen happen, commissioning groups not knowing how on earth to do public engagement, and some firm comes along, and I won't mention their name here, but I'm not very keen on them.
Involved in all things?
No, not that one.
Oh, right.
One that sounds like Electric Light Company, but I didn't mention their name.
PwC.
What?
PwC.
PLC. Right, now, somebody like that comes along and says, oh, we'll organise your engagement for you, for a small fee, and they put on various things which do not really reach the public as such. So I feel that in the future, we've got to go back to what it actually says in the NHS Constitution. The NHS belongs to the people. That's the beginning of the NHS Constitution. When you quote that in a meeting, people think it was said by Trotsky or somebody like that. But in fact, it's the first line of the NHS Constitution. And in future, we want a public NHS, but we want one that people feel they're engaged with and they own. And I'll tell a quick story, Chair, if I may, at the end. And I am ending now, and you can have your tea, it's out. Is that engagement's changing. And I've had a bit to do with this, I think I can say. We have an issue with maternity, and I know Brian knows all about that in Northumberland, but you have an issue with maternity. Are you going to have midwife-led units? Are you going to have the specialist units? Or are you going to encourage you to have births at home? Or all of them, right? And you got to a situation where you can't necessarily have all the midwife-led units kept open in a big county like Durham or Northumberland, right? In any case, it might be better to have them next to the acute hospital anyway, so if there are problems, you've got to take people in ambulances. So what do? Because the people who live in the outlying won't like that. Well, you go to people and say, here's the problem, how will you solve it? Now that sounds incredibly idealistic, but we are trying to do it now. Instead of doing what the NHS used to do, which was say, here's a plan to close something, what do you think of it? And most people say not much, and then you get demonstrations and you get a fuss, and in Hartlepool and Teesside it went on for about 10 years about a new hospital, and by the time they could agree, the money had gone, so we still haven't got a new hospital. But you actually present the problem to people, engage them, and get them to contribute to the solution. Now that's not so far-fetched as it sounds. And with proper resources, I think it could be done. So that's the way I think we've got to go forward. Right, I'll just conclude by saying I have some rather fetching t-shirts here from the Socialist Health Association. If anybody wants to buy some, they're £5 each. And if you've got a better figure than me, you probably look quite nice in them. So if you want one, I've got some. Thank you for that.